My name is Lydia, and I'm 34 years old. I grew up believing family was something unshakable, a foundation that could weather anything. But over time, I learned that love, loyalty, and blood are not always connected the way people think they are. My story began inside the mansion my father built from the ground up, a place that was supposed to symbolize unity but ended up being the battlefield for everything that tore us apart. The mansion sits on a hill overlooking the sleepy town of Langston Creek. Locals called it the Langston Mansion, but to me, it was simply home, or at least, it used to be. My father, Charles Langston, was an architect who built the estate as both a legacy and a prison. The hallways were wide, the windows tall, and the silence inside them unbearable. I was his only daughter for 15 years, until he remarried after my mother's death. That's when everything changed. Dad's second wife, Evelyn, came with two daughters from her previous marriage, Nina and Grace. Nina was the older one by 2 years, always fiery, loud, and proud, a walking storm in every sense. Grace, on the other hand, was quiet and observant, though I always felt she was quietly keeping score. I wanted to welcome them into the family, I truly did. I was only a teenager then and desperately craving connection after my mother died. But they saw me differently, as competition, not kin. The years that followed blurred into endless small fights, silent dinners, and cold smiles. When Evelyn passed away suddenly from a heart condition, my father's health took a sharp decline, and I was the one who stayed behind to take care of him. By then, Nina and Grace had moved out, each pursuing their own ambitions, neither calling unless they wanted something. I didn't blame them at first. Distance sometimes makes relationships easier. But when Dad's memory began to falter, they returned not out of love, but curiosity. They wanted to know what would happen to the mansion. Dad trusted me more than anyone. He made me his caretaker, his assistant, and eventually, the one who managed his finances and daily needs. I didn't ask for that responsibility, but I accepted it out of love. That decision became the wedge that drove the rest of my family further away. Nina began to accuse me of controlling him. Grace would subtly imply I was isolating him. They whispered behind my back, then stopped pretending altogether. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that once Dad's health improved, things would settle down. But I was wrong, things were just beginning. One afternoon, while organizing documents in Dad's study, I overheard something that would stick in my mind forever. The intercom system, the one that connected every corner of the house, had been left on by accident. Through the faint static, I heard Nina's voice. She was in the garden, talking to Grace. Her tone was sharp, low, calculated. "She's just waiting for him to die," Nina said. "Then she'll have everything. Dad's will, the house, the accounts, all of it." Grace's reply was softer, hesitant. "You don't know that. Maybe she really is just helping him." Nina scoffed. "You're so naive. She's been playing this game for years. She got close to him to shut us out. But I've got a plan. We'll make sure she's out before he goes." I froze. My hands trembled as I stood in that silent room. Realizing my sisters weren't just resentful, they were plotting against me. That was the first time I truly understood the depth of their bitterness. They didn't just want Dad's approval. They wanted control. Everything I'd done for love, they saw as manipulation. That night, I confronted my father about what I heard. He looked at me with tired eyes, his memory flickering between clarity and confusion. "Lydia," he said softly, "your sisters have always struggled to understand the difference between care and control. Think love is something you compete for." His words broke something inside me. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to that reassurance. But part of me wondered if he was protecting me out of guilt. Still, I promised him I wouldn't let anyone disrupt his peace. He smiled faintly and patted my hand, unaware of the storm that was already forming outside those mansion walls. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I prepared his meals, managed his medication, and kept the mansion running as usual. But deep down, I was restless. I knew Nina and Grace wouldn't stop. I'd seen the kind of hunger that greed could awaken in people. They had both grown up believing that life owed them something, that wealth, inheritance, and luxury were birthrights, not privileges. And now, they were coming for the one thing that still connected us all, Dad. I started locking certain rooms, keeping sensitive papers hidden, and ensuring the staff stayed loyal. I didn't want a confrontation, but I could feel it coming. Every night, I lay awake listening for sounds in the hallway, half expecting them to appear at the door. I didn't know when, but I knew they'd make their move soon. And then one morning, just as the mist lifted from the gardens and sunlight touched the mansion windows, the security alarm buzzed faintly. I walked to the upstairs balcony and looked outside. There they were, Nina and Grace, standing by the gates with their bags, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. They looked furious. That's when I realized it wasn't just another visit. That was the day they showed up, screaming that Dad had locked them out and I was inside, listening to every word. They showed up at the gate, screaming my name. The sound echoed across the vast lawn like an alarm bell. I froze halfway down the staircase, my heart pounding. The security cameras flickered to life on the monitor beside the hallway, and there they were, Nina and Grace, standing outside the tall black iron gates of Langston Mansion. Both looked furious, their hair disheveled, their clothes rumpled, like they'd rushed over without thinking. In one hand, Nina was clutching a suitcase. Grace had two smaller bags at her feet. They weren't just visiting, they'd come to stay, or so they thought. I walked to the control room and turned up the volume on the intercom that connected to the gate. Their voices were sharp and angry, bouncing through the speakers with static. "Lydia!" Nina shouted. "We know you're in there. Open the gate." Grace's voice followed, softer but strained. "Please, Lydia. We need to talk. Dad locked us out. He won't even answer our calls." Her tone carried a tremor of desperation that almost fooled me. Almost. I hesitated, staring at the grainy footage of them pacing outside in the morning fog. Dad was upstairs, resting after a long night. The last thing he needed was more stress. I should have ignored them. But curiosity kept me there, my finger hovering over the intercom button. The mansion was silent except for the faint hum of the security system. I could hear birds in the distance, the faint rustle of trees swaying in the wind. Everything inside me told me to stay quiet, to let them scream and exhaust themselves. But something about the way Grace looked, the way she kept glancing toward the gate camera, made me uneasy. They started arguing with each other, their words spilling through the speaker. "This is your fault," Nina snapped at Grace. "You said she'd listen if we came." Grace's reply cracked with tension. "What was I supposed to do? Dad won't even talk to us anymore. He's cut us off completely." "Oh, please," Nina spat. "You think she hasn't been feeding him lies about us? She's been poisoning him against us for months. That's why we're locked out." Poisoning him. The phrase made my chest tighten. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them that I'd done nothing but take care of him, but I knew that arguing through a speaker wouldn't change anything. I could feel my pulse racing as I stood there, torn between anger and sadness. They didn't stop. Nina's rage was relentless. She kicked the gate, her voice rising with each word. "You think you can shut us out, Lydia? You think this place belongs to you? You've turned Dad against his own daughters." Grace pulled her back, whispering something I couldn't hear. But Nina shook her off violently. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just anger. It was humiliation. Being outside that gate made her feel powerless, and she blamed me for it. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. "She's got him locked in that house like a prisoner. I'll bet she's hiding something in there, maybe even the will." Grace's eyes widened. "Don't say that, Nina. You don't know what's going on inside." "Oh, I know," Nina hissed. "She's waiting for him to die so she can have it all to herself." I pressed my hand against the cool marble of the wall, trying to steady my breathing. They didn't just resent me, they truly believed I was capable of cruelty. The pain of it settled deep, but I couldn't let it show. I had to be stronger than their accusations. Minutes passed. They kept shouting. I thought about calling security, but the staff was off duty that morning. I was alone in the mansion with Dad. And now, surrounded by cameras and silence, I felt more trapped than they were. I finally turned toward the stairwell, meaning to check on Dad, but then Grace's voice stopped me in my tracks. Maybe she's not even home, she said weakly. Nina laughed, a cold, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, she's home. She's probably standing by the window, watching us. She loves this, making us beg. They didn't know how right they were. I was watching. Every word, every gesture. But it wasn't satisfaction, I felt it was heartbreak. They were my sisters, even if they refused to see it that way. Every cruel thing they said cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I turned on the intercom camera to zoom in closer. The look on their faces was something I'd never forget. Nina's twisted with fury, Grace's streaked with tears. They were united in anger, yet both drowning in something deeper. Fear. Fear of losing the last connection to the only parent we had left. For a moment, I almost opened the gate. My hand hovered over the switch. But then I remembered Dad's voice from the night before. Don't let anyone disturb my peace, Lydia. Not even them. I stepped back, forcing myself to stay quiet. Through the glass, I could see Grace clutching her phone, probably trying to call me again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, but I didn't answer. They began pacing again, their voices rising with every step. Nina shouted my name until her voice cracked, while Grace pleaded, her sobs audible even through the static. It was a haunting sound, one that would replay in my mind for days to come. I stood there, silent, invisible behind thick walls and heavy doors, my reflection flickering on the black screen of the monitor. And that's when it hit me, something sharp, chilling, undeniable. They didn't know I was inside, listening to every word. They started talking about Dad like he was already dead. That was the moment something inside me broke. I stood there in front of the security monitor, staring at the image of my 2 half-sisters pacing in front of the gate. Their faces were twisted with frustration, their words sharp enough to slice through the static of the intercom. They didn't know I could hear every word they said, and in a strange, painful way, that made it worse. It was like listening to a confession I was never supposed to hear. Nina was the first to speak again. He's probably gone. Senile, she said bitterly. That's the only explanation. He doesn't even know what he's signing anymore. She's got him wrapped around her little finger. Grace glanced toward the camera uneasily. Nina, stop. You don't know that. Oh, please, Nina shot back, pacing like a caged animal. You saw what happened last time we came here. She wouldn't even let us talk to him alone. Everything goes through her now. She's managing the house, the accounts, the doctors, everything. If that doesn't scream manipulation, I don't know what does. Their voices grated on me, the way their assumptions turned my love into something twisted. They were talking about my father, the man I'd been bathing, feeding, and comforting for months, as if he were already gone. As if he were just a number in his will, a sum of money waiting to be divided. Grace sighed, her voice quieter. Maybe he just doesn't want to deal with us right now. He's been sick for a while, and what? Nina snapped. You think he suddenly decided to rewrite his will and cut us out of it for fun? Wake up, Grace. She's orchestrating this whole thing. She's isolating him so that when he dies, she gets everything. Her words sank into me like poison. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. The anger and disbelief tangled inside me until I couldn't tell which was stronger. They weren't just accusing me of greed, they were rewriting the truth in real time, shaping it into something ugly and irreversible. Then Grace said something that made my breath catch. Maybe it's already too late to do anything. If she's got control of his estate, we might not even find out when. Don't you dare say it, Nina hissed. He's not dead yet. But when he is, she'll make sure we find out through a lawyer's letter, not a phone call. Her voice trembled not with grief, but rage. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she didn't get what she wanted growing up. Even now, it burned with entitlement. I wanted to scream. To tell them that I'd been the one staying up at night watching Dad's chest rise and fall. Terrified that one morning it wouldn't. But the words caught in my throat. They wouldn't believe me. They never did. For a moment, Grace's expression softened. You really think she's capable of that? Nina turned to her with cold certainty. I don't think I know. I've already talked to someone. Grace frowned. Talked to who? A lawyer? Nina said flatly. Dad's old attorney. The one from before Lydia came back here. He told me if Dad changes his will again, we can contest it. But we need proof that Lydia's influencing him. The air seemed to drain from the room. Proof. That was what she wanted, proof of a lie that didn't exist. Grace looked uncomfortable. You're not serious, are you? I'm done sitting around, Nina said. She's going to pay for this. I've been digging through Dad's old records. And I already found something strange, a few missing account transfers. Jewelry that vanished years ago. If we can connect her to that, we'll have her cornered. I felt sick. They were twisting the past, dragging up things that didn't belong to them, all to justify their own greed. I thought about the jewelry she mentioned, my mother's collection, the one Dad had hidden away years ago after her death. Only he and I knew where it was. To hear Nina talk about it like a weapon made my stomach turn. Grace hesitated, shaking her head. You're talking about going after her like she's a criminal. She's still our sister, Nina. Nina's laugh was sharp and hollow. Sister? She's nothing to us. She's an opportunist who saw a dying man and decided to cash in. Her words burned. My eyes stung. But I refused to let a single tear fall. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction, even if they couldn't see me. They were feeding off each other's hatred, twisting it until it became something monstrous. Then Grace's phone rang. I saw her glance down and answer quickly, whispering into it. It's him, she said quietly. My heart lurched. Was she talking about Dad? But then Nina grabbed the phone from her hand, barking into it. Yes, we're outside the gate. She won't let us in. We need someone to come deal with this now. I couldn't make out the response, but from her tone, I knew she wasn't talking to the police or family. She was talking to someone else, maybe the lawyer, maybe worse. They'd crossed a line. They weren't just angry daughters anymore, they were plotting, manipulating, setting things in motion I couldn't yet see. I took a step back from the monitor, the static hum buzzing in my ears. My reflection on the screen looked like a stranger, pale, tense, scared. I wanted to run upstairs and warn Dad, but he needed rest. The last thing I wanted was to panic him. I turned away from the screen, but their voices still echoed in my head, bouncing off the marble floors and through the empty hallways. They weren't grieving daughters. They were vultures circling something they thought was already dead. And then Nina's voice rang out again, cutting through the static like a blade. If she doesn't open this gate in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police and telling them she's keeping him hostage. I froze. That's when I made my first big mistake. I answered the intercom. You're the reason he hates us, Nina screamed. Her voice crackled through the intercom speaker, sharp and venomous. I stood frozen, my hand still hovering over the button. The moment I pressed it, silence fell outside the gate for the first time in nearly half an hour. Both my sisters turned toward the camera, their faces illuminated by the pale morning light. I could see every flicker of anger in Nina's eyes, every tear, streaking Grace's cheeks. The power I felt for that split second, being unseen but heard, was both terrifying and intoxicating. What are you doing here? I said finally, my voice echoing back at me from the mansion walls. You can't just show up and start shouting like maniacs. Dad's resting. Resting? Nina spat the word like venom. You mean under your watch? Where no one else can get to him? Where you control every call, every visit, every breath he takes? That's not true, I said, though my voice trembled slightly. You know why I'm here. He asked me to stay because his health. His health, Nina interrupted, laughing bitterly. That's your excuse for everything. You've turned him against his own daughters. Grace stepped forward, her tone softer but equally hurt. Lydia, please, we just want to see him. He hasn't returned our calls for weeks. We thought maybe something happened. I hesitated. They didn't know Dad had been struggling with his memory again. He'd barely slept the last few nights. Seeing them like this, furious, chaotic, would only make things worse. I needed to protect him from that kind of stress. But how could I explain that without sounding exactly like the controlling villain Nina already believed I was? Nina, I said carefully, you can come back tomorrow. I'll make sure Dad's awake and ready to see you. But right now, he needs rest. Please, don't make this harder than it already is. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Nina's face twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. You don't get to tell us when we can see our father. Who do you think you are? You're nothing but a glorified nurse who got lucky when he decided to pity you. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. You don't understand, I said quietly. Dad's fragile. The doctor said. The doctor said, she mocked. Me off again. You mean the doctor you hired, right? The one who probably only talks to you? I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I'm not going to argue with you about this. I'm just asking you to respect Dad's boundaries. Grace stepped closer to the gate. Lydia, please, just let us in for 5 minutes. We won't cause trouble. We just want to see him with our own eyes, please. Her voice wavered, and for a second, my resolve nearly cracked. But then, I caught the glint in Nina's eyes, cold and calculated. Grace might have been pleading from the heart, but Nina was strategizing. I could see it in the way she watched me through the camera, like a hunter waiting for her prey to flinch. You're wasting your time, Nina muttered, grabbing Grace's arm. She's not going to let us in. She's too busy guarding her little kingdom. Stop it, Grace hissed. But Nina yanked her arm away and looked straight into the camera. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her voice low and sharp. You think because you've got the codes, the papers, and his signature, that this house belongs to you? You don't deserve any of it, Lydia. You never did. My heart raced, but I refused to respond. Silence, I told myself, was safer than fuel. But Nina wasn't done. Do you even hear yourself? I finally said. This isn't about money or control, it's about Dad. You should be worried about his health, not... Don't you dare tell me what I should care about, she shouted, her voice breaking. You've already taken everything from us. Mom's jewelry, Dad's attention, this house, everything. You're the reason he hates us. I froze. My pulse stopped. That accusation wasn't new, but hearing it again with that much venom hit like a slap. My throat went dry. I didn't know what to say. My mind flickered back to the jewelry, the set that vanished after my mother's death. The same set Nina had mentioned earlier. They never let it go. Nina, I said quietly. You don't know what you're talking about. Her laughter echoed across the speakers, shrill and mocking. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You took what wasn't yours, and you've been hiding behind Dad's weakness ever since. You think no one's going to find out, but you're wrong. Grace tugged on her sleeve. Nina, stop, please. This isn't helping. But Nina ignored her completely. He might be too old to see through you, but I'm not. You're not going to get away with this, Lydia. I'll make sure of it. Her voice had shifted from anger to something more dangerous, a promise. I stared at her face on the screen, every feature filled with hatred. She didn't want reconciliation. She wanted revenge. I felt my chest tighten. This conversation is over, I said, pressing the intercom button to disconnect. But just before the line cut, I heard her mutter something under her breath, something that made my blood run cold. Grace gasped and turned toward her, whispering urgently, You can't say that, Nina. But Nina only smirked, her lips curling into a grin that didn't belong to someone sane. The audio crackled, her words barely audible but clear enough to freeze me in place. What she said next made my blood run cold. We know what you did with Mom's jewelry. The words came through the intercom like a blade slicing through glass. I stood there in stunned silence, my heart hammering so loud I could hear it echoing off the marble floor. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her, that my mind was filling in the silence with my worst fears. But Nina didn't stop there. She leaned closer to the camera, her expression gleaming with satisfaction, the kind that only comes when someone believes they've found your weakness. Did you think we'd never find out? She said, her tone smug, almost gleeful. You stole it, Lydia. You took Mom's jewelry after she died and hid it in that house. Dad covered for you because he always favored you, but we both know the truth. I froze. My throat tightened so much it hurt to swallow. Memories rushed back the night after my mother's funeral, the way Dad had quietly packed away her things, his face hollow and exhausted. I remembered him locking a small wooden chest in the study and whispering that some things weren't meant to be touched again. He'd told me it wasn't for anyone's eyes, not mine, not Nina's, not Grace's, only his. That was 20 years ago. Now, to hear Nina twist that memory into a weapon felt like betrayal all over again. "Nina! Stop," Grace said softly beside her. "You don't even know what you're saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," Nina snapped. "I saw the receipts. The inventory list from the insurance company. Everything was logged except one item, Mom's emerald necklace. The same one Lydia always begged to wear as a kid. That wasn't true. I never begged to wear it. I loved it because it was Mom's. Because when she wore it, it shimmered like her laughter. It wasn't about wanting it, it was about remembering her. But try explaining that to someone like Nina, someone who saw sentiment as weakness. "You're lying," I said, my voice low but steady. "You don't have any proof." She smirked. "Proof? Oh, I'll get it. I already spoke to Dad's lawyer. Once we file for discovery, I'll have full access to his safe deposit records. Let's see what you've been hiding, shall we?" My stomach twisted. That safe. The one Dad had kept locked for years, the same one where he'd hidden Mom's jewelry. The same one, only I had the combination to now, because he'd forgotten it after his stroke. I'd guarded that code like a secret, not because I wanted the jewelry, but because I wanted to protect his last promise to her. But to Nina, it would look like guilt. Grace tugged on Nina's arm. "You're taking this too far. You don't even know if she has it." "Of course she does," Nina shouted. "Where else would it be? Dad's too weak to move anything, and Lydia's had full control of this place for months. She's been playing caretaker while pocketing everything she can." "Enough," I said sharply. "You're making things up to justify your own greed." That stopped her for a moment. Then, slowly, she smiled a dangerous, knowing smile. "Greed? That's rich, coming from you. You've been living in his mansion, using his money, controlling every aspect of his life, and you're calling me greedy?" "I've been taking care of him because he's sick, Nina," I said through gritted teeth. "You wouldn't understand that because you've never cared about anyone but yourself." Grace looked between us, her expression torn. "Please stop," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "This isn't what Mom would have wanted. She'd hate seeing us like this." But Nina was past the point of reason. "Don't talk to me about Mom," she said coldly. "Mom would have wanted justice. She'd want her things where they belong with her real daughters, not the thief pretending to be one." I couldn't take it anymore. My hands shook as I slammed the intercom button off. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my pulse and the faint creaking of the old mansion settling around me. I backed away from the console, staring at the blank screen where their faces had just been. My chest ached with fury, but underneath it was something else, fear. Because for the first time, I realized Nina wasn't just angry. She was dangerous. She had gone beyond family drama. She wanted to destroy me. I turned and walked toward the study, needing to clear my head. The hallway felt colder than before, every shadow stretching longer than it should have. When I entered the room, I saw the portrait of my mother hanging above the fireplace. Her painted eyes seemed to follow me as I crossed to the desk. I whispered under my breath, "What would you do, Mom? What would you say to them?" Of course, there was no answer, just the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. I knelt beside the cabinet where Dad had once shown me the safe, hidden behind a false panel. My hand hovered over it. I could almost hear his voice again, deep and steady. "This is for her, Lydia. Keep it safe until the time is right." I hadn't thought about those words in years. Now they echoed like a prophecy. I didn't open the safe. I couldn't. Instead, I stood and turned toward the window. Through the thin curtains, I could still see my sisters outside. Grace had sat down on one of their suitcases, wiping her face with trembling hands. Nina, on the other hand, was pacing again, phone pressed to her ear. She was calling someone, but who? Then I saw headlights approaching through the trees. A sleek black car rolled up the driveway, its tires crunching against the gravel. Both my sisters turned toward it immediately. For a second, I thought maybe it was one of their friends, someone they'd dragged into this chaos. But when the door opened and I saw who stepped out, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't family. It was Mr. Heller, Dad's lawyer. That's when I heard a car approaching up the long driveway. Someone else had arrived. The lawyer stepped out, holding a folder with my father's name. For a moment, I couldn't move. Through the large window overlooking the front drive, I saw Mr. Heller, my father's longtime attorney, emerge from the sleek black sedan. His shoes crunched against the gravel as he adjusted his coat and glanced around the property. Even from a distance, his movements were precise, cautious, as if he already sensed the tension in the air. I hadn't expected him. Dad hadn't mentioned anything about a visit. Nina and Grace rushed toward the car before he could even reach the gate. From inside the mansion, I could see their animated gestures, their frantic words. The security camera's microphone picked up only fragments of their voices, blending with the wind and the hum of the idling engine. But it was enough. "She locked us out!" Nina shouted, pointing toward the mansion like she was exposing a criminal. "She's isolating Dad, she won't let us see him," Grace chimed in, her voice trembling. "Please, Mr. Heller, we just want to know if he's okay." Mr. Heller looked between them, his brow furrowed. I'd always found his calm unsettling. He was one of those men who never reacted more than necessary. He adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable, then said something that made Nina's face tighten with anger. "No, you can't just walk in," I heard him say faintly. "Mr. Langston's wishes are very clear about visitation." "Visitation?" Nina snapped, incredulous. "He's our father, not a patient in a facility." She's twisting his words. "And you're letting her." I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to read Mr. Heller's face, but his expression didn't change. He was listening, weighing every word. Then, almost casually, he raised the folder in his hand. The camera zoomed slightly as he said, "I'm here because Mr. Langston requested I deliver something. That's all." The folder. My father's name printed across it in bold type. My pulse quickened. Whatever was inside that folder, whatever my father had asked to be delivered, it wasn't ordinary paperwork. Dad had been growing increasingly secretive in recent weeks, scribbling notes and signing envelopes that he insisted I keep safe. But I never imagined he'd call Mr. Heller here, especially without telling me. Nina wasn't giving up. She stepped closer to the lawyer, practically blocking his path. "You can't seriously be siding with her. Don't you see what she's doing? She's cut us off. She won't answer our calls, and now she's keeping Dad locked away in there." Mr. Heller remained silent for a moment before replying, "Miss Langston, your father's legal affairs are entirely his decision. If you'd like to discuss them, you'll need to make a formal appointment through my office." Nina's face flushed red. "A formal appointment? You've got to be kidding me!" Grace tried to calm her, gently tugging her sleeve. "Nina, please. He's just doing his job." But Nina was far past reason. She threw her hands up in frustration and shouted toward the gate camera. "Lydia! You can't hide behind these walls forever. We'll get in one way or another." I didn't answer her. I couldn't. Instead, I reached for the intercom button that connected directly to the gate and pressed it slowly. The speaker crackled to life. "Mr. Heller," I said evenly, my voice echoing faintly through the outdoor system. "You can come in." The gate began to creak open, the heavy metal groaning as it moved. Nina whirled around in disbelief as Mr. Heller walked past her without another word. He didn't even glance in her direction. The gate shut behind him, leaving my sisters on the outside, furious and shouting as he approached the front door. A few moments later, the doorbell rang 3 short chimes that echoed through the empty halls. I took a steadying breath and opened the door. "Miss Langston." He greeted me with a curt nod. His eyes flicked briefly to the staircase behind me, where the faint sound of my father's cane could be heard on the floor above. "Your father asked me to bring these." He held up the folder. I stepped aside, motioning him in. "Please, come in. He's resting, but I can bring him down if needed." "That won't be necessary," Mr. Heller said, his tone neutral. "He asked that I deliver this directly to you. He said you'd understand." That sentence made me pause. "Understand what?" Mr. Heller hesitated. He didn't elaborate. Only said it was important, and that you'd know what to do when the time came. He handed me the folder. It was heavier than I expected, the seal unbroken. My father's handwriting scrawled across the top. For Lydia's eyes only. Outside, I could still hear my sisters arguing with each other, their voices faint through the thick walls. Nina's anger was rising again, her threats blending into the sound of the wind. Mr. Heller glanced toward the noise. Persistent, aren't they? He murmured. You have no idea, I replied. He gave a small nod. Your father's very lucky to have you here. I don't think they'd be as patient. That remark carried more weight than he probably intended. I managed a small, polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Heller. He adjusted his glasses again. I'll take my leave then. And Miss Langston, if there's trouble, don't hesitate to call me. Your father anticipated there might be some. My stomach dropped. He said that? He gave a slow nod. He did. More than once, actually. He turned and left without another word, stepping back into the cold air. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, the folder clutched tightly to my chest. Outside, Nina shouted something I couldn't make out. Grace's voice followed, trying to calm her. The sound faded slowly as the car engine roared to life again. Mr. Heller's vehicle disappearing down the drive. I looked down at the folder, my father's handwriting staring back at me. For Lydia's eyes only. I carried it into the study, my hands trembling slightly. Whatever was inside, it wasn't just paperwork. My father had planned this, anticipated it, maybe even feared it. As I sat at the desk, I whispered to myself, "What did you do, Dad?" Then I slowly broke the seal. He handed me the sealed envelope and whispered, "Your father knew this day would come." The envelope contained his will and a warning. My hands shook as I slit the seal open with the edge of a letter opener. The wax cracked cleanly, but my heart was pounding too fast to notice anything except the sound of my own breathing. Inside the envelope was a neatly folded document, several pages thick, and on top of it a smaller handwritten note in my father's unmistakable cursive. I set the will aside, staring at the note for what felt like a lifetime before I finally found the courage to read it. Lydia, if you're reading this, it means the noise outside has finally reached our doorstep. I trust you to do what's right, not what's easy. There are things your sisters don't understand, things they're not meant to know until I'm gone. The truth about your mother's jewelry must stay hidden until the right time. Keep your heart steady, and do not let guilt cloud your judgment. What I built was meant for you to protect, not to apologize for. Dad, my throat tightened as I finished reading. His handwriting was slightly shaky, the pen marks uneven from his trembling hands. But the message was clear. He knew this moment would come. He'd predicted the very chaos that was unfolding outside. I looked down at the will, still unopened, and took a deep breath before unfolding the first page. My eyes scanned the text quickly, the legal language blurring together until I reached the words that changed everything. Hereby declare that my estate, including the Langston mansion, its assets, and personal holdings, shall be left in full to my daughter, Lydia Langston. I felt dizzy. I blinked several times, rereading the line just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. There it was, in black and white, every asset, every property, every account, all of it was in my name. There was a section detailing provisions for Nina and Grace small trust funds, educational stipends, and nothing more. It wasn't cruel, it was careful. But I knew exactly how they'd see it. To them, this document would be proof of every horrible thing they believed about me. I folded the papers back together and stared blankly at the fireplace. The crackle of wood was faint, just enough to remind me that the house was still alive, still breathing with the echoes of my family. I couldn't tell if the weight in my chest was relief or guilt. Maybe both. A noise startled me, the sound of footsteps in the hallway above. I turned quickly, listening. My father's cane tapped softly against the wooden floor, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I hurried upstairs, the papers still in my hand. When I entered his room, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, half-dressed, his silver hair disheveled. "What's going on, Lydia?" he asked, his voice tired but alert. I heard shouting. I hesitated. It's Nina and Grace. They're at the gate again. Mr. Heller just came by. He looked at me sharply. Heller was here? Yes. He brought something for you for me, actually. I held up the folder. Your will. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Good. Then it's time. Time for what? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for me to close the door. Your sisters will never understand the decisions I've made, he said. They think this house is just brick and wood. But it's history. Legacy. It's your mother's memory. And I couldn't let them tear it apart. I sat beside him, my voice low. They think I manipulated you, Dad. They're angry, and they're not going to stop. He sighed, leaning back against the headboard. Anger is easy for them. It's all they've ever known. But they'll learn eventually that love isn't something you inherit. His words lingered in the air, heavy and final. I wanted to believe them, but I could already hear faint echoes of Nina's shouting through the walls. She wasn't going to let this go quietly. When I went back downstairs, the intercom light was flashing red. I pressed the button, and her voice blasted through the speaker before I could even say hello. Where is he? Nina demanded. We saw Heller leave. What did he bring you? I said nothing. Answer me, she yelled. You think you can hide it from us? We know it was the will. He told us he was changing it. You made him do it. Grace's voice trembled in the background. Nina, please stop. You're making it worse. Oh, don't act innocent now, Nina snapped. You heard what he said last week. Dad was redoing everything. And now she's got it. She's got everything. I could almost feel her fury through the static. Her words carried the same kind of desperation that borders on madness. I pressed the intercom button, keeping my tone calm. Go home, Nina, both of you. You'll get a copy through Mr. Heller soon enough. There's no reason to do this now. Go home? She repeated, laughing bitterly. You really think this is over, don't you? You think because he gave you that house, that paper, that power, that you've won? I knew silence would enrage her more than anything else, but I couldn't bring myself to argue anymore. Then Grace screamed. The sound was so sharp and unexpected that I jumped back from the console. I looked at the security feed, my stomach dropping. The camera showed Grace standing near the gate, her hands pressed to her mouth, staring toward the wall. Nina was nowhere in sight. Nina? Grace's voice quivered. Where are you going? The feed flickered as lightning flashed across the sky. In that split second, I caught a glimpse of Nina scaling the side fence, her coat snagging on the iron bars. My heart stopped. Then I heard Grace scream someone had climbed over the gate. They broke into the mansion. The sound of the security alarms ripped through the quiet halls like a scream. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun toward the monitor, and there she was, Nina, climbing over the stone wall that lined the east side of the property. Her coat tore on the spikes as she swung her leg over, dropping into the garden with a graceless thud. Grace was still outside the gate, frozen in disbelief, shouting her sister's name, but Nina didn't look back once. She was coming for me. The security system's sirens began blaring, the flashing red lights illuminating the foyer in sharp pulses. I rushed to the control panel and hit the lockdown sequence, sealing the main doors and the side entrances. But I was too late. One of the garden doors had already been forced open. The system registered the breach. My palms went clammy as I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. The storm outside had killed the connection hours ago. Dad, I whispered, racing toward the staircase. By the time I reached the landing, my father had emerged from his room, gripping his cane, his face pale and confused. What's happening? He asked, his voice trembling. It's Nina, I said, panting. She's here. She climbed the wall. His eyes widened in disbelief. She wouldn't. She already did. I took his arm and helped him back into his room, locking the door behind us. I needed to buy us time. Stay here, okay? Don't come out. No matter what you hear. He nodded weakly, his breathing shallow. I could tell the noise and shock were too much for him. But I didn't have a choice. I stepped back into the hallway, closing the door softly behind me. The house was a maze of echoing sound, the storm howling through the open doorway downstairs. the blaring alarm, the creak of footsteps somewhere near the study. I made my way down the stairs slowly, every step deliberate. The chandelier swayed overhead, its crystals flashing red in the rotating security lights. My stomach twisted with every shadow that shifted across the walls. I was alone in a mansion that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. Then I heard her. "Lydia!" Nina's voice rang out from the back hallway, sharp and mocking. Come out, wherever you are." She was enjoying this. I ducked behind the corner of the staircase, clutching my phone like a weapon even though it was useless. My mind raced through every possible exit, every hiding place. But I couldn't leave Dad. I had to protect him and the will, the note, the secrets that would only make things worse if she found them. The security monitor on the wall flickered again. I could see her moving through the west corridor, flashlight in hand, her face twisted in determination. She was searching for something, me, or Dad, or the evidence she believed would prove her version of the story. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating Grace still standing by the gate, shouting into the wind. "Nina, stop this, please." Her voice was faint against the thunder, but I could see her desperation. She didn't want this. She wasn't part of it anymore. But Nina was too far gone. I crept toward the study, trying to reach the hidden compartment under the desk where I'd placed the will and Dad's note earlier. I needed to secure them, make sure she couldn't use them against us. My fingers trembled as I slid open the false drawer, just as I heard glass shatter in the hallway. She'd broken a window. I pressed the papers deeper into the compartment and closed it just as she stepped into the study. The smell of rain and cold air followed her inside. Her hair was soaked, her eyes wild. She looked less like my sister and more like a stranger who'd been hollowed out by resentment. "There you are," she said, smiling faintly. "Hiding in your throne room." "Nina," I said carefully, my voice calm even though my heart was racing. "You need to leave, right now." "Leave?" She laughed bitterly. "After everything you've stolen? Not a chance. Where is he?" "Dad's asleep," I lied. "He doesn't need to see this." "Oh, he'll see it," she said, stepping closer. "He'll see what kind of daughter he really raised." Her boots left muddy prints on the carpet as she circled the room, scanning every surface. I could tell she was looking for the folder, the will, the proof. I moved between her and the desk. "You're not taking anything from here." Her smile faded. "You think you can stop me?" "I'm not going to fight you," I said. "You're angry, and you should be, but breaking into Dad's home, scaring him like this? What do you think that's going to do?" She stopped walking, her expression flickering something between pain and fury. "He's already scared, Lydia. Scared of dying alone. And you're making sure of it." "That's not true," I whispered. "You know it isn't." "Do I?" she snapped. "Because every time we call you say he's sleeping. Every time we visit, you won't let us in. What are you hiding?" "I'm protecting him." She flinched at the volume of my voice. For a split second, I saw something human in her eyes, something almost regretful. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows as the lightning strobed through the room. Nina's voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You can't keep me out forever. You can't erase us." I took a step back, clutching the edge of the desk. "You need to go, Nina, please. Before this gets worse." She stared at me for a long moment, chest heaving, then whispered, "You think you've won." Before I could respond, a sharp voice came from behind her, Grace, soaked to the bone, standing in the doorway. "Nina, stop!" she cried. "What are you doing?" Nina turned, startled, her expression hardening again. "Go home, Grace. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You're ruining everything." They stood there, face to face, lightning flickering between them. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched them like a reflection of two halves of the same wound, one bleeding out, the other trying to stop it. Then the thunder cracked so loudly that all three of us flinched. And over the noise, I heard it, my father's voice. Weak and trembling. Calling out from upstairs, Lydia? What's happening? Nina's head snapped toward the sound. Her eyes darkened. That's when Nina burst into the study, her eyes full of rage. Tell him what you've done. Nina's voice ripped through the air like thunder, louder than the storm outside. My father's weak cry from upstairs had drawn her like a magnet, pulling her from fury into full-blown chaos. She stormed past Grace and straight toward the staircase, her boots pounding against the floor. I followed her instinctively, shouting her name, but she ignored me completely. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, she was already standing in the doorway of Dad's bedroom, her chest heaving, her hair wild and dripping from the rain. My father sat on the edge of his bed, pale and shaking, confusion and fear mixing across his face. "Nina!" I shouted, my voice echoing down the hall. "Stop! He's not well!" She whirled on me, her eyes blazing. "Oh, he's well enough to hear the truth," she spat, then turned back to Dad. "Tell him, Lydia. Tell him what you've been doing behind his back." My father's trembling hand gripped his cane tighter. What's going on?" he whispered. Nina stepped closer to him. "She's been lying to you, Dad. About everything. The jewelry, the will, all of it. She's stealing from you right under your nose." My stomach dropped. "That's not true," I said, taking a step forward. "Don't lie to him," she screamed. "We know about Mom's jewelry, Lydia. You think we didn't find out? You took it, didn't you? You've been hiding it all these years." The words hung in the air like smoke. My father's face fell, his eyes darting between us, confusion clouding his features. "Jewelry?" he murmured. "What jewelry?" "Mom's," Nina said quickly, seizing the moment. "The emerald set you kept after she died. The one you promised to keep safe." Lydia took it and hid it in the house. "That's enough," I said sharply. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Nina hissed. "You've been manipulating him since the day you moved back here. First, you take care of him, then you start handling his finances, and then, surprise, you get the mansion in his will. Convenient, isn't it?" My father's head dropped into his hands. "Please. Stop shouting," he whispered. But she didn't stop. Grace stood frozen by the doorway, tears glistening in her eyes. "Nina, please," she said softly. "You're scaring him." "Good," Nina snapped. "He should be scared. He deserves to know who he's been trusting." That was it, the last straw. I stepped forward, shaking but firm. "You think this is about money? About inheritance?" I said, my voice low. "You've twisted every kind thing I've done into something vile because you can't stand that Dad trusts me. But you know why he trusts me? Nina? Because I'm here. I've been here every single day while you were out spending his money and pretending to care." She flinched but didn't back down. "You're lying." "I'm not." I turned toward Dad, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Dad, please tell her. Tell her who's been taking care of you." He looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. But before he could speak, Nina cut in again, shouting, "Don't you dare defend her. She's got you brainwashed, Dad. You don't even see what she's doing." "Enough," my father's voice, though weak, cut through the chaos. We all froze. He stood shakily, using his cane for balance, his breath ragged. "You think I don't know my own daughter?" he said, glaring at Nina. "You think I can't tell the difference between love and manipulation?" Nina's lips trembled, but she refused to look away. "She's taken everything from us, Dad." "No," he said quietly. "You took yourselves away, both of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. "I have watched you two fight over shadows," he continued, his voice hoarse. "You turned grief into competition. Lydia stayed because she loves me. You left because you couldn't stand the idea of not being in control." Grace began to cry softly. Nina stood rigid, her face pale. "That's not true," she whispered. "You don't know what she's done." "I know exactly what she's done," Dad said. "She's kept this house running, She's paid the staff, handled the doctors, and made sure I didn't die alone. Nina's face hardened again, her voice cracking with rage. You think that makes her innocent? She's hiding something. I'll prove it to you. Before anyone could stop her, she turned and lunged toward the study across the hall. I ran after her, shouting for her to stop. She reached the desk first, pulling open drawers and tossing papers to the floor. Where is it? She screamed. Where's the will? Where's the jewelry? Grace rushed in behind us, sobbing. Nina, please stop, you're losing it. Dad appeared at the doorway, gripping the frame for support. His voice shook. Nina, don't do this. But she wasn't listening. Her hands tore through folders and envelopes until she reached the hidden compartment beneath the desk. My heart nearly stopped as her fingers brushed against the concealed latch. I moved before I could think, slamming the drawer shut. Don't touch that, I shouted. Why not? She snapped, voice trembling. What are you hiding? It's not yours. She tried to pull it open again, but I grabbed her wrist. Enough, Nina! She yanked away violently. Get off me! We struggled, our movements clumsy and desperate. Grace was crying, begging us both to stop. Dad's cane clattered to the floor as he tried to steady himself. The entire room seemed to blur with motion and sound until suddenly, Dad's voice rose again louder, sharper than I'd heard in months. Stop it, both of you. We froze. He stood there, his frail body trembling, but his voice carried the weight of authority that silenced everything. His eyes still sharp beneath the years burned into Nina's. Tell him what you've done? He repeated slowly. You don't need to, I already know. Nina stared at him, her lip quivering. Dad. He shook his head, sadness etched into every line of his face. You were never left out, Nina. You chose to walk away. Grace gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. I felt tears welling in my eyes, not out of relief, but out of grief for all the years wasted on this resentment, all the love buried under suspicion. And then my father turned toward me, his voice softer now but resolute. Lydia, close that drawer, it's time she knew the truth. I swallowed hard, unsure what truth he meant. My pulse raced as his gaze flicked between the two of us. Dad's next words silenced everyone in the room. You were never left out, you chose to be. My father's words landed like thunder, silencing every sound in the room. Even the storm outside seemed to hush for a moment. Nina froze mid-breath, her hand still gripping the edge of the desk, her chest rising and falling as though she'd been running. Grace stood by the doorway, trembling, her tear-streaked face pale in the flickering light. My father straightened as much as his frail body would allow, his voice carrying a steadiness that commanded the space. I tried to include you both, he said, his eyes fixed on Nina. For years I tried, but every time I reached out, all you wanted was something more money, influence, control. You never came here for me, only for what I could give you. Nina's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked like she didn't recognize the man in front of her anymore, the father she'd always assumed she could manipulate. That's not true, she finally said, her voice shaking. I came because you wanted the mansion, he interrupted, his tone sharp. Don't lie to yourself, Nina. You came the day you found out I was sick, not the day I needed you. You wanted the inheritance, not the responsibility that came with it. She flinched as if struck. You think I don't care about you? I think you care about your pride more than anything, he said coldly. And that pride blinded you to what's right in front of you. I stood frozen, not daring to speak. My father turned to Grace next. His gaze softened slightly. And you, Grace, you followed your sister because you were afraid to be alone. You never hated Lydia. You just didn't want to lose Nina. Grace let out a small sob, covering her face with her hands. I didn't know what to believe, she whispered. I just wanted us to be a family again. Dad nodded slowly. So did I. But sometimes, family isn't built on blood, it's built on who stays when things fall apart. He turned to me then, his eyes tired but full of something I hadn't seen in months, trust. Lydia stayed. She took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. She didn't ask for this house, or the money, or the power you think she stole. She asked for peace, and I couldn't even give her that. Nina's face twisted with pain. You're taking her side. There are no sides, he said, his voice rising again. There's only truth, and you've spent years running from it. Her fists clenched at her sides, her voice breaking with anger. You don't see it, do you? She's got you fooled. You think she's your savior. But she's been hiding things from you. Ask her where Mom's jewelry went. Ask her. He looked at me, his brow furrowed. The jewelry. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. It's still here, Dad. Just like you told me to keep it. In the safe. Grace gasped softly. Safe? Yes, I said. You asked me to protect it years ago. You told me not to tell anyone until... I hesitated, my voice cracking slightly. Until the right time. My father's eyes filled with tears. He nodded slowly. That's true. Nina turned toward him, stunned. You told her to hide it? Yes, he said simply. Because I didn't trust either of you not to sell it the moment I was gone. Nina's mouth opened, but no words came. Her anger was fading now, replaced by something far more painful: shame. Dad reached for his cane, steadying himself. Your mother's jewelry wasn't just expensive, it was sentimental. Lydia's mother wore it on the day we bought this land. She wanted it to stay in the family, not end up in a pawn shop. Grace began crying openly now, her body shaking with quiet sobs. We were so wrong, she whispered. Nina's eyes darted from me to Dad, her voice trembling. So, she didn't take it? No, Nina, Dad said softly. She protected it from both of you. The silence that followed felt endless. Rain pattered softly against the windows, thunder rolling faintly in the distance. For a long moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the same one that had been there since I was a child. Then Dad spoke again, quieter this time, his words heavy with sorrow. Do you know why you were left out of the will? Nina didn't answer. Because I couldn't trust you to take care of what matters, he said. You wanted control, not family. And I've already seen what control does to this house. It breaks it. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked small, like the sister I once knew. Not the bitter woman who had climbed the gates to accuse me of theft. Grace moved toward her, gently taking her hand. Nina, please, she whispered. Let it go. But Nina shook her off, her voice cracking as she whispered. He's choosing her over us. No, Dad said softly. I'm choosing peace. And that means protecting this home from all of you, if I have to. His words made something in me ache. I wanted to reach for him, to stop him from saying things that would only make Nina spiral further. But the look in his eyes told me it was too late. He was done holding back. Nina's breathing quickened. You think this is peace? She asked bitterly. You think she'll bring peace? She's been taking everything from us piece by piece, and now you're letting her finish the job. Dad closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over his face. I'm too tired for this, Nina. Go home before you say something you can't take back. But she didn't move. Her face twisted again, not with anger this time, but desperation. Home? She said, almost laughing. I don't have a home. You gave it to her. Her words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and unanswerable. She turned suddenly, storming past Grace and me, her footsteps pounding down the stairs. I called her name, but she didn't look back. Dad sighed deeply, gripping my hand. Let her go, he whispered. There's nothing left to say. But as I listened to the sound of Nina's footsteps echo through the mansion, something inside me told me it wasn't over. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was the kind that comes before something far worse. But she didn't. She had one last card to play. She threatened to destroy everything. Nina's footsteps thundered down the stairs, each one heavier and faster than the last. I followed her, my heart pounding, the echo of my father's words still hanging thick in the air. Grace trailed behind me, sobbing softly, begging her sister to stop. But Nina didn't listen. Her anger had boiled over into something darker, something I didn't recognize anymore. When I reached the bottom of the staircase, I saw her in the grand hall. She was standing in front of the old display cabinet, the one filled with framed family photos and awards from my father's architecture career. The light from a nearby lamp flickered, catching her face in half-shadow. She looked unhinged, wild eyes, trembling hands, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Nina, please," I said carefully, keeping my voice low. "Don't do this." She turned slowly toward me, her face contorted with rage. "Don't what, Lydia? Don't finally stand up for myself? Don't show you what it feels like to lose everything?" Her voice cracked as she picked up one of the framed photos, Dad at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, beaming with pride. She stared at it for a second, then threw it across the room. The glass shattered against the marble floor, scattering shards in every direction. Grace screamed, "Nina, stop!" But Nina was past reason. She grabbed another photo, hurling it at the wall. Then another. Her movements became erratic, frantic, like she was trying to destroy every memory that had ever excluded her. "Is this what you want, Lydia?" she shouted between throws. "You wanted the house? Fine, take it. Take it all, you've already taken everything else." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't move toward her. I knew one wrong step would send her completely over the edge. "You're angry," I said softly. "I get that. But this isn't going to fix anything." She turned on me, her expression twisted with disbelief. "Fix anything? There's nothing left to fix." She pointed toward the staircase where Dad's voice had last echoed. "He just told me I was never wanted here. That's not something you fix, Lydia, that's something you burn." I took a slow breath, my stomach tightening. "You don't mean that." "Oh, don't I?" Before I could answer, she lunged toward the table near the fireplace and snatched up the brass lighter that Dad used to light the hearth on cold nights. She held it up between her fingers, flicking the flame to life. The small orange glow reflected in her eyes like a spark of madness. "Nina!" Grace cried out. "Put it down, please!" But she didn't. She just stared at the flame, then at the heavy velvet curtains by the window. "You think this house means everything to him?" she said, her voice low and trembling. "Let's see how much he loves it when it's gone." The sound of the lighter snapping open and closed echoed through the room. My breath caught in my throat. I could barely move. My mind was screaming at me to do something, but my body felt frozen in place. "Nina, don't," I said again, inching closer. "Please. You'll regret this." "Regret?" she said bitterly. "You think I haven't been living in regret since the day Mom died? You got his love, his attention, this house, and what did I get? His silence." Her voice cracked. For a fleeting second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to follow Dad around the garden, desperate for his approval. But that softness vanished in an instant, replaced by fury. She moved toward the curtains, flames still burning. Grace ran forward to grab her arm, but Nina shoved her away. "Stay out of this, Grace!" she screamed. "You always stay out of everything, you never pick a side." "I am picking one," Grace cried, her voice breaking. "I'm picking peace. I'm picking what's left of our family." She flicked the lighter again, and the small flame kissed the edge of the curtain fabric. I lunged forward instinctively, slapping the lighter out of her hand. It skittered across the floor, landing near the piano. We both stared at it for a moment, our breathing ragged, our eyes locked. "You think you can control me forever?" Nina hissed. "You think you can take everything and walk away clean?" "I don't want to control you," I shouted back. "I just want this to stop." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside lashed against the windows, thunder rumbling in the distance. Grace crouched on the floor, sobbing quietly. Nina looked at me, her expression breaking into something raw and heart-wrenching. "You don't get it, do you? I don't have anything left to lose." She turned suddenly and grabbed one of Dad's old architectural models off the table, a miniature replica of Langston Mansion. The fragile wooden beam snapped in her grip as she hurled it against the wall. It shattered into pieces, scattering across the floor. Dad's voice echoed faintly from upstairs, weak and terrified. "Lydia? What's happening?" I turned toward the staircase. But before I could answer him, Nina's voice rose again, cold and final. "If we can't have this place, she said, her voice shaking. Then no one will. She darted toward the fallen lighter, snatching it from the ground before I could reach her. Her thumb flicked the wheel once, twice, until the spark caught again. I lunged forward, but she swung her arm wildly, keeping me back. The flame hovered dangerously close to the drapes, to the furniture, to everything that made this house what it was. Grace screamed. "Nina, please, stop!" The lightning outside flashed, illuminating her face for a single, haunting moment, tears mixing with rain, fury mixing with grief. She looked utterly lost, consumed by something she couldn't escape. "Nina," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Don't do this. Please." She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for a split second, I saw hesitation flicker in her eyes. And then the storm outside roared louder, the wind howling against the windows. The lights above us flickered once, twice, then the power went out. The mansion went dark. Everything vanished in an instant, the lights, the alarms, even the hum of the heater that had filled the hall. A sudden silence fell, so deep it made the storm outside sound deafening. Only the flashes of lightning illuminated the room now, each burst revealing our faces frozen in panic and disbelief. "Nina!" I shouted into the darkness. "Don't move!" Her answer came back sharp and trembling. "Don't tell me what to do." But her voice wasn't angry anymore. It was shaking, uncertain, like the fire she'd tried to start had burned out before it began. I couldn't see her, but I could hear her breathing somewhere near the fireplace. The lighter clinked against the marble floor as it slipped from her fingers. Grace fumbled for her phone, the glow from its screen casting faint blue light across her tear-streaked face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What did we do?" I reached out carefully, my hands brushing against the edges of the broken glass and scattered photos. The smell of smoke was faint but still lingering, curling in the air from where the curtain had nearly caught fire. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. Then I remembered Dad. "Grace," I said urgently, "go upstairs, check on him, make sure he's okay." She nodded and hurried toward the staircase, the weak glow of her phone bobbing with each step. I stayed where I was, straining to listen for any sign of Nina. The mansion's silence was unnatural, heavy, oppressive, filled with the weight of everything that had just happened. "Nina," I said softly, "please talk to me." A long pause. Then a shaky breath. "I didn't mean to." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her silhouette for a split second. She was crouched near the fireplace, staring at the scorched edge of the curtain. Her face was pale, streaked with mascara and rain. The lighter lay between us, its metal gleaming faintly in the brief flash of light. I knelt down, my voice low but firm. "It's over. No one got hurt. Let's just stop this before it gets worse." She didn't look at me. "I wasn't going to do it," she said quietly. I swear, I wasn't. I believed her. But believing her didn't erase the fear that still gripped me. I could feel the tension pulsing in the air, fragile and ready to snap at the smallest sound. Suddenly, a sharp creak echoed from above us. I looked up, my heart lurching. For a split second, I thought it might be the storm shaking the old beams, but then I heard something else. Dad's voice. "Lydia?" he called weakly from upstairs. "Is it over?" I stood immediately. The storm raged harder, wind whistling through the cracks of the old windows. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door slammed shut. The whole mansion felt alive, breathing, moaning, reacting to the chaos inside it. Grace came running back down the stairs, panting. "He's out of bed," she said frantically. "He wouldn't stay put." "What?" I turned toward the stairs just as another flash of lightning lit up the hall. For a split second, I saw him, Dad, standing halfway down the staircase, gripping the railing with one hand and his cane with the other. He looked frail and lost, like a ghost wandering through his own house. "Dad!" I cried, rushing to him. "You shouldn't be up." He looked past me toward Nina, who was still sitting on the floor. His voice was soft but full of pain. "Why?" he asked her. "Why would you do this?" I didn't, she whispered, shaking her head. I wasn't going to, I swear. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him carefully down. The last few steps. Let's get you back to your room, she said gently. But he didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on Nina. I built this house so my family would have somewhere safe, he said quietly. And now I don't even recognize it. The words hit all of us like a physical blow. Nina covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Grace started crying again too. And I just stood there, feeling every wall, every memory, closing in on me. A faint beeping sound broke the silence. I looked toward the far end of the hallway. The fire alarm panel was flickering weakly, the backup generator must have kicked in. The red warning light blinked, illuminating the faint smoke curling from the scorched curtains. Grace, I said quickly. Help me put this out completely. We ran to the kitchen, grabbed the emergency water bucket Dad kept under the sink, and poured it over the base of the curtain. Steam hissed as the last embers went out, leaving only a burnt patch of fabric and a heavy smell of smoke. Nina sat motionless through it all, her face blank now. Her rage was gone, replaced by exhaustion. Grace knelt beside her, whispering through tears, "It's over, Nina. Please don't make it worse." Nina didn't respond. She just stared into the dying glow of the fireplace. Her voice barely audible. "You'll never understand how it feels to be forgotten." Lightning flashed one last time, illuminating her face, and then, faintly in the distance, the sound of sirens broke through the storm. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But as the seconds passed, the sound grew louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flicker through the rain outside, reflecting off the wet marble floors. I turned toward the window, my pulse racing. "Someone called the police," I whispered. Grace's eyes widened. "Who?" "I don't know," I said softly. "Maybe one of the neighbors heard the alarms, or maybe Mr. Heller came back." The sirens wailed louder now, cutting through the rain, the thunder, the heavy silence between us. Nina looked up slowly, her face ghost pale in the strobing lights. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" she said quietly. I didn't answer. That's when I heard the sound of sirens approaching. The truth finally came out. The sirens cut through the storm like a blade, echoing off the mansion walls. Blue and red lights flashed across the rain-streaked windows, turning the entire grand hall into a pulsing kaleidoscope of chaos. I stood frozen near the scorched curtains, still gripping the empty bucket, while Nina sat on the floor with her knees pulled up, staring blankly ahead. Grace hovered between us, her hands trembling. The first knock on the door wasn't a knock at all, it was a heavy pounding, urgent and unmistakable. "Police!" a voice shouted from outside. I dropped the bucket and ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock before pulling it open. 3 officers and 2 firefighters stood on the porch, rain dripping from their jackets. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and kind eyes, stepped forward immediately. "Are you Lydia Langston?" he asked. "Yes," I said, breathless. "Please, come in." "There's been..." He raised a hand, stopping me gently. "We got a call about a possible break-in and fire. Is everyone safe?" "Yes," I said quickly. "It was a misunderstanding. The fire's out. No one's hurt." He nodded but didn't look convinced. His eyes scanned the hall, landing on Nina first. She looked up slowly, the faint reflection of blue lights flickering across her face. "That her?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "She's my sister." "Uh-huh," he said, motioning for one of the officers to stay with her while another firefighter moved toward the damaged curtains. "We'll still need to assess the situation, ma'am." Grace stepped forward, her voice shaking. "It was my fault," she blurted out. "I called them. I didn't know what else to do." I turned to her, startled. "You called the police?" She nodded, tears spilling down her face. "You were fighting, the power went out, and I thought, God, I thought she was going to hurt someone. I just panicked." The officer gave her a sympathetic nod. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Behind us, the faint sound of a cane echoed down the stairs. My father appeared, gripping the railing tightly, his face pale and drawn. "What's going on?" he asked weakly. "Why are there police here?" "Sir, please sit down," the officer said gently. "We'll explain everything in a moment." Dad's eyes moved from me to Nina, then to the officers, confusion clouding his face. "Nina," he said finally, his voice trembling. "What have you done?" She didn't answer. She just stared at him, silent tears glistening in her eyes. The firefighter came back from inspecting the damage and spoke quietly to the lead officer. "It looks like the fire was contained. No active flames. Just smoke. You're lucky it could have spread fast in this old wood." I exhaled shakily. Thank God. But the relief didn't last. The officer turned back to me. "We'll still need to get statements from everyone here," he said. "Standard procedure. We also need to confirm who entered the property without permission." All eyes turned to Nina. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, defiance flickering briefly in her expression. "This is my family's house," she said bitterly. "You can't trespass in a place you belong to." Dad's voice broke through the tension. "You broke in, Nina," he said softly. "You climbed the wall, set off the alarms, and terrified your sister. That's not belonging." Her lip trembled. "You're really going to let them treat me like a criminal?" He closed his eyes, the weight of disappointment visible in every line of his face. "You did that yourself." The officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come outside with us for a few minutes." Grace cried harder, covering her mouth as Nina stood slowly. "This is ridiculous," Nina muttered, but she didn't resist. She walked past me, past our father, her shoulders squared but trembling. As the door closed behind her, the sound of rain swallowing her silhouette, I felt something inside me collapse. I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted her gone, I just wanted the madness to stop. Another officer came up to me with a clipboard. "Ma'am, I'll need you to verify your identity and give a brief statement. After that, we'll file an incident report." I nodded, my voice barely steady. "Of course." Grace followed Nina outside, whispering to one of the officers, while I guided Dad to the couch. He sank down slowly, his cane clattering against the floor. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. When the lead officer returned, he crouched beside Dad. "Sir, you're Mr. Charles Langston, correct?" Dad nodded weakly. "Yes. Sir," the officer continued gently, "we understand this was a family matter. But based on what we've been told and the state of the property, we may need to press charges for breaking and entering. Is that something you'd like to pursue?" The room went silent. Dad's gaze fell to the floor. "I don't want to see my daughter in jail," he said softly. "But I can't let her destroy everything I built either." The officer nodded, his tone respectful. "We'll note that in the report. It'll go through the proper channels." As they spoke, another sound caught my attention, paper rustling. I turned toward the study and froze. The folder from earlier, the will, was lying open on the desk, the pages fanned out like wings. My stomach twisted. I hadn't realized it was still there. The officer followed my gaze. "Important?" I walked over, picking up the papers carefully. "It's my father's will," I said quietly. "Mr. Heller?" "His lawyer brought it today." Dad looked up, his eyes weary. "They should see it," he said softly. "They need to understand." I handed the folder to the officer, who glanced at the cover before returning it. "We're not authorized to handle documents like this, ma'am, but you should probably keep it safe." I nodded, clutching it to my chest. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of voices, Nina shouting something through the rain, Grace trying to calm her. Then the engine of the police car rumbled to life, followed by the sharp squeal of tires on wet gravel. The lights faded into the distance, swallowed by the storm. The house felt empty again, but not peaceful, just hollow, like something vital had been ripped out of it. Grace came back inside moments later, drenched and shaking. "They're taking her to the station," she said softly. "They said she might be charged with trespassing and attempted arson." Dad nodded, his expression unreadable. "She needs help," he whispered. "Not punishment help." Grace knelt beside him, crying into his shoulder. I stood by the fireplace, staring at the blackened curtain and the faint scorch mark on the floor. The mansion smelled of smoke and rain, but underneath that, beneath all the ruin and noise, there was something else: relief. For the first time in years, the lies, the accusations, the buried secrets, they were finally out. Dad looked up at me, his eyes tired but kind. "Lydia," he said softly, "there's one more thing you need to know." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He motioned toward the study. "There's something I never told you. About your mother." But Dad had one more secret to share before the night ended. The secret he'd kept for years. When my father said those words, the room fell still again. The storm outside had softened to a steady drizzle, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows was the only sound left. Grace sat quietly on the couch beside him, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. I stood near the study doorway, still holding the folder against my chest. My heart was pounding again, but not from fear, this time from anticipation. "Dad," I said softly, "what are you talking about? What secret?" He motioned for me to come closer. I crossed the room and knelt beside his chair. His hands, frail and trembling, reached for mine. "You've always believed your mother's jewelry was just that jewelry," he said quietly. "But it wasn't. It was more than gold and stones, Lydia. It was her identity." I frowned, confused. "Her identity?" He nodded. His eyes clouded with both sorrow and pride. "Before I met your mother, she had another life, one she rarely spoke about. She came from a wealthy family who disowned her when she married me. Those emeralds, that necklace, those were the only pieces she kept from that past. They weren't just heirlooms. They were proof of who she was." Grace's head lifted slowly, her red-rimmed eyes wide with surprise. "You mean they were from her family?" "Yes," he said softly. "They were supposed to go to Lydia one day, not because of their value, but because they represented where she came from. Your mother wanted her to have them, to remind her that she could build something new without forgetting where she started." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. All these years I'd thought he was protecting the jewelry because of money or sentiment, but this was something deeper. "So that's why you hid it?" "To protect her legacy." He nodded. "After she died, I couldn't bear to let anyone touch those things. I kept them hidden until you were old enough to understand. But when Evelyn came along, when your sisters came into our lives, I realized how dangerous greed could be. That's why I told you to guard the safe, Lydia. I wasn't just protecting jewelry, I was protecting the truth." Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it. We spent years blaming you for something you didn't even do." I shook my head, my voice cracking. "You didn't know. You only knew the pieces you were told." Dad smiled faintly, though his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "That's what happens when truth stays buried too long. It rots everything around it." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The fire had gone out in the hearth, leaving behind faint trails of smoke curling toward the ceiling. The mansion was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after the final chapter of something broken. Grace stood slowly and moved to the window. The police cars were gone, their red taillights fading into the night. "What's going to happen to Nina?" she asked quietly. "She'll have to face the consequences," I said, though my voice was gentle. "But I think this might finally be what she needs to change." Dad nodded. "She's angry, but she's not evil. Anger just eats at you until you become something you're not." He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. I wanted to tell him to rest, but he wasn't done speaking. "Lydia," he said softly, his voice trembling with effort, "promise me you'll keep this house the way it was meant to be. Not as a symbol of what we lost, but of what we still have." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I promise, Dad." He smiled weakly and closed his eyes. "Good. Then maybe now I can finally sleep." He drifted off a few minutes later, the sound of his breathing evening out as Grace and I sat in silence. For the first time that night, the mansion didn't feel like a cage. It felt like what it was always meant to be: a home, Weeks passed before things started to return to normal. Nina was released after questioning. She pleaded guilty to breaking and entering and was ordered to attend therapy and community service. It wasn't a punishment, it was a lifeline. Grace stayed by her side through it all, determined to rebuild the bond they'd lost. I visited them often, cautious but hopeful. Dad's health declined slowly after that night. The doctors said the stress had taken its toll, but he remained sharp enough to smile every time I sat by his bedside. 6 months later, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, holding my hand. The mansion felt unbearably empty for a while. But it wasn't haunted by anger anymore, just memories. I spent weeks cleaning every room, repairing the smoke damage, restoring the broken frames Nina had smashed. I even replaced the curtains in the hall, though I left the small burn mark hidden behind them. It reminded me of how close we came to losing everything and how lucky we were not to. When the will was officially read, there were no fights, no bitterness. Grace accepted it with quiet understanding. Nina didn't attend, but she sent a letter. It was short and simple. "I'm sorry for everything. I wasn't angry at you, Lydia. I was angry at myself." I cried for hours after reading it. Not because it hurt, but because it healed something in me that I didn't know was still broken. Months later, on the morning of my father's funeral, I stood in front of his portrait in the study, wearing my mother's emerald necklace for the first time. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows made it glimmer softly against my skin. I remembered what Dad had said, that it wasn't just jewelry, it was identity. It was proof that love and legacy can coexist. As I looked around the mansion, the house that had witnessed every lie, every fight, every painful truth, I finally understood what he meant. The Langston mansion wasn't just brick and wood, it was resilience. It was forgiveness. It was the story of a family that broke apart, but somehow found its way back. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The morning air was cool, fresh, alive. The gardens were green again, and for the first time in years, they looked like they were breathing. "I kept it safe, Dad," I whispered into the quiet. "Just like you asked." And as the wind swept through the open doorway, rustling the leaves outside, I felt something unexplainable, a peace I'd never known before. I may have been locked inside that mansion, but that night, I learned who truly belonged within its walls.